Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are in episode 2 of On the Spot. Hey, Aidan. Hey, how
Hi,
you going?
Nathaniel. Here we are for another week.
Yes, we've reached a big milestone and we've hit episode 2 of this live streaming sessions.
Haven't been taken off the air after the pilot. That's always positive.
That's it. Just to introduce ourselves again, guys, because we've got a new visitor that's joining us this week. Myself, I'm Nathaniel Galindo, General Manager of Engineering here at Flow Power. I'll pass it over to Aidan.
Yes, Aidan Moore, look after some of the wholesale activities here at Flow Power and some of the transfer pricing for our more standard retail products. So good to be here.
Great, thanks, Aidan.
And
we've got let me just cut into that, Alex. We've got a new visitor this week, one of our subject matter experts who will be talking about what's been happening over the last 3 months on the market, and in particular on the demand side. And so Alex Lehman, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Alex Lehman. I'm the demand response lead here, so I'm responsible for managing the demand response portfolios and a fair bit of the sort of spot market sort of operations and data.
Cool. Well, welcome aboard, Alex, and yeah, everyone who's jumped online. Thank you again for joining us. And if this is your first session, we had we launched On the Spot last week for the first time, where we Aidan and I just covered some elements of the spot market and what's been happening with some of the impacts of COVID. Today we've introduced, or we've brought on Alex to come and talk about some of the demand side and some of the trends that we're seeing in the market as well, with the likes of RERT and FCAS and other elements. But before we kick off today, I guess we've been getting some feedback from our audience around who is Flow Power and what we do. And yeah, we want to thank you for asking those questions, because sometimes it's the basics that we forget when we're put on the spot and we're live broadcasting. So let me just spend 10-15 seconds just addressing that. At the end of the day, we see ourselves as an energy management company who just so happens to have a retail license. And by doing so, we feel that it's not just about how you manage your energy on site, but really it's how you procure, how you utilize the market, and how you leverage these tools, whether it's behind the meter or front of meter, to your advantage. And so so really at the end of the day, we're here to share these opportunities and these tools with you, and On the Spot is one of those channels of which we're trying to educate the market in what's happening out there and the changes that are occurring. But yes, thank you very much for asking that question, because it's probably something that we should touch on maybe every now and then, just to highlight where you're getting this information from and what we're trying to share. Cool. What I might do is pass over to Aidan quickly, and he can just go through some of the first steps of this webinar.
Yeah, so technology willing, we're going to throw in a couple of polls today. We'll see how we go, the first of which will flash up on screen in a moment. And really, like Nathaniel said, we're coming at it from the energy management side of things and from the Flow Power lens, but we certainly really want to understand a little bit about you, our audience. And so the first question is really looking to see what role best describes you, so that we can start to tailor some of this content over the weeks ahead. So I think you've all, I can start to see answers rolling in at the moment, but we'd expect that you're probably on the buy side, the consumer's side there in terms of energy buyer or procurement manager. Looking at the signups, we've also had some consultants and brokers in there as well, so I'd expect to see some numbers there.
Yeah.
On the development side, certainly Flow's been fairly active, obviously in the PPA space, and increasingly so in the engineering space. So we expect to see a few developers there, and we can certainly have plenty of topics in the weeks ahead that sort of cover those areas. And then from a sustainability side, we might start to see a few roll in. So
Yeah.
I think
one thing, Aidan,
responses are almost in. Yeah. Go for it, Nathaniel.
One thing that that we also picked up from last week's attendees, but there was a lot from government, a lot of attendees from government actually, whether they be federal or state or even at council level. So interesting how some of these topics are starting to resonate with that type of audience too. So apologies that there's no selection for the government space at this stage, but by all means, flick it in that other, and we'll try to provide a more detailed breakdown of other roles there.
Okay, I think we've basically had most of the results roll in. I'm not sure that they didn't quite flash up on screen. Here we go. So a bit of a split. Interestingly, other capturing the most there with 34%, but about a third and a third, or a quarter and a quarter in the consultant broker space and the development side of things. Cool. So that's probably in line with our expectations, I would have thought. So welcome all, and yeah, we look forward to sort of tailoring some of our content in the weeks ahead to sort of hit topics that you're after. You also have a question panel that you can submit directly to us, and I've already started to see some of them roll in. So as we go through today's topic, if you've got any questions directly for Alex or myself and Nathaniel, just chuck them in there and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end and we can get to them then.
Absolutely. So so maybe we'll kick on with the content here. So today, guys, we introduced these market quadrants last week, and we mentioned how at each session we'll cover one or maybe a couple of these quadrants to understand how they interrelate with each other. Today, bringing Alex on board, a lot of the discussion will focus in that orange quadrant as to what's happening in the market, which is probably on trend at the moment in terms of what people want to kind of see and understand more about, particularly with COVID and other elements. But yeah, we'll kick off the discussion, and I might just get Alex to jump in now and start to provide an overview on some of the subjects that we want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nat. So today there was two topics that we're really going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit about RERT, so the Emergency Reserve Program that's activated over summer. And the second topic we're going to talk about, we've had quite a few questions coming around it, is FCAS, particularly relating to February events in South Australia. There's a lot of customers would have been exposed to the FCAS markets for the first time. Sorry, have we got the RERT slide?
Great.
There we go. Great.
So yeah, let's kick into it. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Great. So a quick summary of RERT. So RERT is the Reliability and Emergency Reserve Trader. It's basically an emergency mechanism that exists outside of the market, managed by AMO, and it exists to really provide emergency supplies when there's a high shortage of generation capacity in the market. It's only been activated in sort of 3 seasons per se, basically summer. So it was sort of first activated in very late 2017 and summer of 2017 and 2018, and then we've seen it activated each summer since. Significantly, the very first year that it was activated, the total cost of procuring RERT, so from these external providers, was just shy of $52 million, so quite a high cost. And since then, the costs have come down, and the costs have been nearly identical the last 2 summers. This summer was unusual in that we saw a high number of days, so we saw 5 separate days where the RERT was called upon. We saw in New South Wales, RERT was required in New South Wales for the first time in the history of the RERT, but we saw a lower number of volume of RERT activated, so about 2/3 of last summer, which indicates that the sort of reserve gap supply was actually quite a bit smaller than in previous summers. Even though the cost was very high, which itself is quite interesting because it suggests that RERT providers are getting smarter about how they manage contracts, and that the contracts in New South Wales were likely more expensive compared to the Victorian and South Australian contracts in previous years.
I think that's really interesting, Alex, in terms of less megawatt hours of activation and that similar cost overall. Silly question. It was only activated in 2 states on an occasion of a total of 5 days for the most recent summer, but presumably there may have been there may have been RERT participants in other states that may have had availability payments for this summer that are included in that number of 32. Well, that's only for New South Wales and Victoria.
Only for New South Wales and Victoria. Previously, we have seen contracts with availability payments in other states, but this year the vast of the RERT was what's called short notice. So there are no essentially availability or standby payments. The payments are only for when the RERT is called upon and required, which could be actually an interesting cause of why the price is higher, because reserve providers are likely to set higher benchmarks for their reserve when it's going to be called upon, rather than receiving a baseline standby payment.
And the total dollars there, who pays that? Where is that cost borne within the market?
Yeah, great point. That cost has to be recovered from customers in the market. So that typically means retailers who then have to recover those costs from their customers.
And so we see a big increase there on the dollar per megawatt hour basis, Alex. Is that the market participants being a bit more sophisticated in how to manage their portfolio, or could that be a combination of New South Wales being a bit more sophisticated in how they bid their loads for this program? Can you give any insights as to why the jump at a dollar per megawatt hour scale?
Yeah, it's interesting. So all the RERT contracts are all confidential. So we can't determine who may be setting those costs and where they're coming from. But it's certainly suggestive that the fact that New South Wales was activated, that there may have been higher costs associated with those providers in that state. The average cost for the summer 2018-19 period was about $10,000 a megawatt hour, which you'll notice is less than the market price cap of just shy of $15,000, whereas the numbers for the most recent RERT season work out, I believe, at about $16,000 per megawatt hour, so just over the market price cap, which seems to better reflect where RERT should sit, which is an out-of-market emergency mechanism. It makes sense that those contracts would cost more than the maximum price of in-market resources.
Yeah. So that would suggest that it's actually fulfilling its purpose in terms of when AMO chooses to trigger that off, or.
Yeah, the RERT is certainly there as an emergency mechanism. It's always existed. We've seen perhaps in the early season it being used more as a crutch, being relied on pretty heavily to keep the market operating and preventing blackouts. And the lower number of megawatt hours activated in recent seasons, in the most recent season, is likely an indication of, that the market has improved. The supply conditions have improved. We've also seen a slightly less hot summer, so slightly lower demand comparatively. So the RERT is there really as a backstop, and that's an improvement of where it should be.
So I guess maybe over time, it'll be good to illustrate where maybe some of the other demand response activities fit amongst these numbers, because what might be a bit more difficult to measure, but we know is effective, is the spot responsive demand response participants out there that are on the wholesale spot price and that are actively monitoring where the prices are going and responding in real time to those price points. But that's not the topic for today. So we'll progress from here. But yeah, over time, demand response is very much a growing trend, particularly across the energy industry. We know that the wholesale demand response mechanism is currently being reviewed at the moment, which I think there's going to be an announcement any month now, Alex. So that's scheduled. I don't know the exact date. Alex, would you know the exact date as to when the next wholesale demand response announcement will take place?
We're expecting something soon because they've just asked to push back basically the start date amongst the impacts of coronavirus. So I believe there's an open discussion around whether it starts. It was initially planned to start next year and there'd be market designs, but that's probably going to be put on ice for at least 12 months.
Yeah. So again, another factor of the market that's been impacted by COVID, but we'll jump into that over the coming episodes. So so guys, from here, maybe we'll jump into the next topic.
Yeah, so really quickly wanted to talk about FCAS and the impacts that it had on the South Australian market in February this year. But firstly, just a very quick 101 as to what FCAS is. So frequency control ancillary services are actually a collection of 8 separate markets that are used to manage the frequency of the grid. So we're a nominal 50 Hertz system, and the regulation markets, there's 2 of those, are used to maintain the frequency around 50 Hertz, close to 50 Hertz. And then there's 6 contingency markets, which are classified as either raise or lower, 3 each. And they're to help basically control and contain large frequency deviations when there's contingency events, so emergency events on the grid. So that could be a network element tripping offline, or a power station tripping offline, or a large load like a smelter coming offline. Frequency is really important because if you don't maintain it, you'll get emergency systems kicking in, and you can, and in the worst case, you can get a domino style effect where you have rapid cascading failures and you'll end up with a system black event. Generators and some loads can provide this FCAS, and it is a market, so they actively bid prices and submit prices and get dispatched in the same way that the energy market operates across those 8 different FCAS markets. So it's an unusual area of the NEM that people haven't. It's been around since the existence of the NEM, but it's become increasingly more important and in recent years, particularly with some recent events.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that there are 8 markets and 1 commodity market, yet commodity market has been the main focus historically, and I think we'll see a little bit more about that, about why, given the relativity of those 8 markets to the 1, though that obviously changed for February in South Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's have a look at what actually happened in South Australia in February. So basically on the 31st of January, we had a high voltage power line in the west of Victoria, which was taken down by a tornado. That led to the interconnector to South Australia becoming unavailable, and the South Australia was effectively islanded from the rest of the NEM. There was lots of energy supply, so there was no concerns with reliability. There's no requirement for RERT or any other mechanisms like that. However, the system security was highly impacted because now all of the frequency supply, so the FCAS services, had to be provided from within South Australia itself, which basically means gas generators. So on the left, there's a pie chart which shows what the split of the FCAS and the energy costs for the South Australian market were in February 2019. And you see that the energy costs are 98% of what constitutes the market, with FCAS making up 2-ish%. And that's quite typical. Most months look very similar to that. And then if we look at February 2020 on the right, we see an enormous increase in the FCAS costs. Basically, it was to do with the way gas generators were bid, the fact that FCAS services could only be provided from within South Australia, and there's no renewable generators that are able to provide that. So it's just the gas generators and the large Tesla battery that could provide those FCAS services. And those costs had ended up being around 100 times what they would be on a typical month. Wow. So a huge impact, and like a fairly unprecedented, we'd call this a black swan event. The significant thing is that these costs have to be recovered from the market from a split of customers and generators. So all of the generators within South Australia are having to recover some of these costs, and likewise for customers, because the costs have to be paid out to the people providing the FCAS services.
So from a customer's perspective, Alex, I mean, you say that, black swan event, very unusual. Do customers in South Australia sort of have to school up on FCAS markets and this sort of risk moving forward, or across the NEM, or is it sort of an outlier do you think?
I think it's challenging because it is an outlier, and it's unfortunate that there's very limited essentially mechanisms or means that you can take to protect yourself against these events. Sort of their costs that are incurred as part of using energy because they're secondary services. But it is perhaps important to understand where those costs come from and how they might impact a bill, and the fact that they exist, that it's not just energy that you pay for, that there's this wide range of other secondary services that also constitute part of your electricity bill.
Yeah, and I guess, Alex, if we can just talk about some of the influential factors that are driving some of these FCAS costs. I suppose a lot of the FCAS frequency control has been done by generators in the past with a small contribution by the load side. Particularly in South Australia, the growth of renewables projected, and I think Renew Economy just released this today or yesterday, it's projected to grow from something around 50 or so percent to about 84% growth in the next 4 years. With that many renewable projects coming online in South Australia, where do you see the impact of those projects having on the FCAS market?
Yeah, it's something that's incredibly significant. So traditionally, renewable generators, which are inverter connected to the grid, haven't provided FCAS services. You can provide FCAS through inverters, but you need specific hardware. So the owners of those stations and the operators need to actually choose to install that equipment and have the plant registered to behave in that way. So we haven't seen that happen historically because it hasn't been seen as important. As you can see, if it's only 2% of the market cost, then why would you bother? But increasingly, it's becoming important that the FCAS costs are rising. So those are costs that either generators have to bear, or the fact that they're revenues that generators could earn by providing these. And also in South Australia, which is a small system with fairly low inertia now due to those renewable assets all connected by inverters, we're seeing higher levels of essentially market intervention by AEMO to manage the system security in that region. And that's particularly impacting South Australia more than the other markets. So FCAS provision by renewable generators or generators other than the traditional incumbents is becoming more and more important, and really important in South Australia. AEMO has actually recently done some trials for wind farms in South Australia to provide FCAS to prove that it's possible, and to demonstrate the technology and the impacts it could have on the market.
Great. So I guess it will remain an ongoing factor across the market, and particularly with South Australia, and across the whole NEM, I guess, as more renewables come online.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, I think the certain media outlets would call South Australia a sort of a test case of high penetration renewables, and
Yep.
how ancillary services are integrate into that mix is important, and is quite an interesting thing that many other power markets around the world are observing how we're doing this.
Yeah. Cool. I guess before it's 2:24, guys, and I'm finding that some of these sessions are just flying past with all the content that we're presenting in this half-hour session. I'm wondering whether we need to review that, but I guess, guys, we are approaching the 2:30 mark, and one thing that was highlighted earlier was the opportunity to just interact and maybe just ask a couple of questions through. So I do encourage, if you do have a question, please send it through the question box, and we'll try to get around to that. I guess, guys, just in terms of summarizing the content, are there any closing comments on the RERT side or the FCAS side that we're seeing in the market, both Alex and Aidan?
I'll let the expert talk, I reckon.
I was going to let you start.
On the spot.
From my side, I think, I mean, having been in this market for 10 years or so, it's the rise of these ancillary service markets and secondary costs that are being borne by the market and then passed through to consumers like RERT, that will I think, not disappear anytime soon, like we've just hit on. And so I think in terms of building education on the customer side, on the consultant and broker side, it's instrumental. And yeah, it certainly will be a focus. And in future, perhaps this will be a key part of electricity retail contracts where people drill down into what's being passed through to them, what try and participate in these markets as well. So it's certainly a fascinating space, and there's big dollars at play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the elements here too that's worth raising is a lot of these contingency markets are now becoming accessible to the energy user side, and traditionally a lot of it was usually the playground for a lot of the generators to operate their assets in response to these ancillary services, but more and more over time there are technology solutions that will enable customers to either participate in FCAS today or potentially participate on a much more sophisticated level down the track. So yeah, watch this space. We certainly can't cover it in great detail in a 30-minute session, but if you're interested to talk to us about this more, then by all means reach out to us through on the spot at flowpower.com.au. Okay, so let's jump into some of these questions here. All right, so we'll flick through a few of these. So Damien Ng has asked, what are the main impacts of the delay in the shift to a 5-minute settlement? So that's recently been extended out. Alex, can I pass it over to you to share your insights there?
Yeah, certainly. So a number of upcoming changes have been delayed based on coronavirus, looking at pushing that back by about a year. I believe it's the current proposal on 5-minute settlement. I think the main impacts will be it will give people more time to prepare. I personally think there was actually a fair bit of time to prepare, but a lot of the big retailers and gentailers argued they've got some very large complex systems that obviously impact hundreds of thousands, millions of customers. So it will give those companies more time to actually prepare and plan their systems. On the generation side, a number of generators, it will give them a chance to improve control systems. We already saw a number of gas generators, particularly open cycle peakers, basically had equipment upgrades and registration changes to enable them to respond faster. So some of those units can now, where they previously could respond within about 30 minutes, can now respond in the 5 to 10 minute time frame, allowing them to respond to those 5-minute price changes. So if there are any other gas generators that were sort of on the fence or struggling to implement those changes, that may give them more time. I think otherwise from that, I think it will be sort of very much business as usual. Nothing will particularly change. I think everyone's sort of focus is, particularly for the big retailers and gentailers, is currently kind of on the impacts of coronavirus and what that's doing to the electricity market.
Probably the other one to add is that the $300 cap contract isn't sold out on the futures market or the options market out at the moment beyond the end of the 30-minute market and what was to be the start of the 5-minute market. So ASX Energy is, I think, has been working for a long time to get that contract up and running, to have the correct settlements, but haven't done that yet. So this will probably buy a little bit more time, assuming that it does go through on that delay, to allow those cap contracts to at least trade with the half-hour settlement for at least another 12 months.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll continue on here. Tom's asked, is there a correlation between RERT activation and the Hazelwood power plant closure?
Yes, very much so. We saw Hazelwood, they announced with relatively short notice that they were going to close in early 2017, and it immediately caused a lot of waves in the market around supply, particularly in the Victorian market, and it is not a coincidence that the summer of 2017-18 was the first time we'd seen RERT activated in the history of the RERT, due to the hole in the market that Hazelwood left. And the volumes of RERT that were procured in that first season were on the order around 1,500 megawatts, which is not far off what Hazelwood itself was as a total size. So AMO was incredibly cautious about what that would do, and probably, you know, in some cases trigger the RERT as a precautionary measure, would some would argue. But from a market perspective, there were no significant blackouts in that period, and was certainly not related to the hole that Hazelwood left. And new generation has since been, particularly renewables, have helped come in and close some of that gap since. So yes.
Yeah, and on a similar note, Tom's also asked, are we heading to a cliff with the imminent closure of Liddell? And I guess we've got a little bit more time to prepare for that one, but similarly, would you say, Alex, that we will experience similar trends to how Hazelwood shut down and potentially having to fill the gap there?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. As a direct result of the Hazelwood closure, the rules were amended so that now there's a minimum of 3 years warning must be provided by generators before they mothball their plants and exit the market. Liddell has provided, I think, 5 years of notice and had some pretty public discussions with the old Turnbull government. But certainly AGL's perspective is that their closure of Liddell is not going to impact the market, and that they can replace the generation of Liddell with new generation sources, with you know, renewable sources and others. But the federal government has a different perspective. But I don't think that we'll see anything quite like the Hazelwood closure, because of the changes to the rules and the fact that people are now much more attuned to the fact that these large old generators are coming to the end of their lifespan and are exiting the market. So I don't think we'll see the same impact.
Yeah, I guess Hazelwood was really the catalyst for us to understand how to experience and how to manage those types of events with generators being shut down.
Certainly, yeah.
Tom, and maybe we can be a bit quick here, but Tom asked if RERT is different from the AMO demand response mechanism, and I guess the quick answer there, Alex and Tom, is RERT, as what Alex referred to, is more of an emergency tool that the AMO lean on, whereas the wholesale demand response mechanism is I suppose an ongoing program that allows the energy users to bid their load into the market just as much as a generator would bid their supply to the market. And so it is more of a different scheme altogether. But yes, we could talk about a lot of the differences around that separately offline if you'd like to reach out. Was flow power? So Chris asked, was flow power's demand response volume activated in New South Wales and Victoria? The short answer is yes. So we do operate a portfolio in all states, and yes, for this year, as part of that Victoria and New South Wales, we did participate and we did pull forward a load that was activated. Okay, there's a whole series of questions here, guys, and really thank you very much for sending them through. We're not going to be able to get around to all of them because I just noticed it's 2:33. What we might also ask is 30 minutes too short for these types of sessions, because I'm finding that there's a lot of content here that we can keep talking about, and we're getting to 2:30 really quickly. So we may incorporate that into the question next week if we don't get enough responses today. Yep, Mark, thank you. You think 1 hour is better? Drishti, yep, 1 hour. Yeah, okay. So we might look at expanding this session next week, guys, just to keep the conversation going for a bit more longer. But yeah, given that we have committed to a 2:30 stop, we will have to drop it here. Thank you all for attending. Alex, thank you for joining us today. We'll definitely have you on the spot again. Aidan, it's always good to do this with you, and let's catch up in a week's time. All right, awesome. Thanks very much,
everyone.
guys.
Great, thanks guys.
Cheers.